So we're going to talk about basic food safety information. And like I said, this is something you likely already know, but we'll just go through it so we all have the same foundation here. Food safety is, you know, we cover it from all facets, from the farming part all the way to shipping. And Jamara being complex and lots of different commodities, we have different ways of harvesting the different commodities. So we have to be, between Walter and myself and the information that we share with you, we have to be diverse and have a general understanding of how it all works. So the idea is that we have a full scope food safety program, not just focusing on one part of this process, but the whole process and how we can keep the food safe from, you know, the cultivation and planting, growing, harvesting, transportation, packing, you know, the whole scope. Everything that we're responsible for, we're going to make sure that the product remains safe. So the idea is Jamara is a big player in the food industry, and not always do, you know, Jamara has multiple divisions and we handle several commodities. And what happens on a blueberry farm in Michigan in the Nature's Partner label can affect what's going on in Reedley, California with stone fruit. So we have to be very conscientious of that as part of the Jamara community, that you're not just affecting what's going on in your little space, but in your world, but rather Jamara as a whole. And every grower is part of that community. And therefore, you know, we're producing amazing food for the world. What does that mean as far as food safety? We each have that responsibility. It's not just about the commodity we're putting in the clamshell, but the bigger picture. So what you do and what your employees do can affect all of Jamara, all of Nature's Partner, and every commodity that we represent. So that's a big scope and a big responsibility, but with a thoughtful approach and being conscientious of how you handle your commodities, we can help to maintain that safety. So we have, the United States has one of the safest food systems in the world, and it's in part because of how Jamara handles and the responsibility and efforts that we put in. So that's a big deal. We want to maintain a safe and secure food supply chain. National food safety is necessary to maintain a healthy and thriving society. And all food companies that produce products must be free from adulteration, and which adulteration is a change to the food product. So anything that is an additive that's not supposed to be there, anything that alters the food, that falls under the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act. And we have to guarantee that the food is safe for human consumption. So recently, and we've talked about this, and I will actually have more specific information later about the Food Safety Modernization Act and how that affects what we're doing on the farm. I'm not prepared to talk about that in depth today, but that new law will also affect what's going on and what we're able to do in food production. So the goal for a comprehensive food program to anticipate and control any potential hazards to the product from planting all the way through distribution. And as we have moved, the food safety programs have sort of evolved. We've become very risk-based, so assessing the risks that are present in your warehouse, on your ranch, and understanding how those affect the safety of the product and what steps you can take to prevent food contamination at that point. So if And this is part of what the Global Gap and Primus GFS audits are focused on, are risk, assessing the risk. And if you have more questions about that, we can talk about that going forward. I do have risk assessments available if you want to complete them, or if you haven't done that already. Everyone that is affiliated with the business that your farming operation, your harvesters, your chemical supplier, they're all part of the system, and everyone's responsible for maintaining food safety as it pertains to their job. Management, and you all being the management, the trainers of the food safety programs, you are, by being here, you are allocating time and resources to food safety. You're demonstrating that you care about this process and understand that it is critical and something that you're committed to maintaining. So it's good to show your employees that you are committed by participating in trainings and then training them and giving them the tools that they need to conduct food safety activities. These are all part of this big system, this food safety system. I've said this, that food safety is part of the whole process, from farming all the way to shipping and distribution. We also, again, just to reinforce what I just said, the non-production items such as training materials, supporting personnel, and giving them I want you all to feel empowered with your food safety programs too, that it is a living thing, and it's something that as you dedicate as you become more intelligent with food safety and confident with food safety, you can feel empowered during audits and know how to move and react if something goes awry with your food safety program. So it's not a static program, and as you have new employees or you have a situation come up, maybe you have deer in your field, like all those things affect food safety. So how do you address those issues? I want you to be empowered, and I also want you to know that there's open communication between us, that you can always email or call me if you have questions about how to handle wild turkeys in your avocado grove, and those sorts of things that happen. They're real life. We're not farming inside of a building, not yet anyway. So how do you handle all those elements that can affect food safety? Just as a reminder, keep your phone on mute. There's a little bit of background noise, no talking, but just some shuffling around. So if you could mute your phone, that'd be great. So the high cost of foodborne illness, and we've been seeing more and more of this in the media. We have, as detection levels become more, we can detect smaller amounts of things as the science, we become more exacting with the science. Also, we have this globalization of information through the internet. Information is traveling, so if we have a situation where there's an outbreak in Florida, we might be able to correlate that to something that happened in Washington and backstep that to a common source. Maybe the outbreak happened, maybe we had a listeria problem with apples, and that distribution took product all over the country, and how did that affect the consumer? So we have there are very high costs with foodborne illness, and we're seeing that recently with Chipotle and how that's affecting their business. One mishandling, and it could be as simple as someone not washing their hands properly, can cause a major problem, and it could cost you your business. It could cost people their lives. So this is a big deal. It's not just about doing food safety because we have to, because Jennifer said so or Walter said so. It's about being responsible and preventing foodborne illness. So it's everyone's responsibility. It's not just mine and Walter's responsibility as the, you know, the food safety team within Jamara. It's about what you're doing and what your employees are doing and how their behavior and their actions can affect the food supply and the safety of the food supply. So just some of the costs of a foodborne illness. There's always the potential for a lawsuit, and having a food safety program in place, doing trainings, keeping on top of your food safety program, and then having a third-party verification of your food safety program with an annual audit are things that you can do to justify your program. So if you ever got into a situation where you had to prove that the contamination didn't come from you, you have the ability to do your, you know, trace back, trace forward. You have a food safety program in place, and you can demonstrate that you've been doing your due diligence to avoid being a part of a lawsuit. Increased insurance if you do have a problem with foodborne illness. You have low employee morale, high turnover, negative media, and these are all things that are bad for business. So one thing that I didn't mention, you know, I was saying outward in consumer health, but we also have employee health, and keeping identifying if someone is ill. You don't want to have that person put your employees at risk as well. Then you have low productivity, and things sort of take a slump. So just staying on top of things and being empowered to make the call as you need to. So there's 3 classifications of hazards, and the food safety programs that we have in place have addressed these 3 different hazard areas, and the risk assessments also address these hazards. So looking from different points of your program. But we have physical contamination, glass, jewelry, machine parts, rocks. These are all physical contaminants. Biological, organisms, insects, and chemical, which can be pesticides, perfumes, wax, oils, and lubricants from equipment. Depending on how if you wash and wax your product, are you applying the proper amount of wax and fungicide in the wax so you don't have an over, too much of that could cause a problem for the product or the consumer. So physical contaminations are any unwanted item that comes in contact with the product. We have being a fresh pack situation, having something in the box or in the clamshell for the consumer, that is a physical contamination, and something that we encounter occasionally. Walter will get a consumer inquiry about, I found something in my blueberry or whatever it is, and what can we do to prevent that? Maintain equipment properly. Again, always training employees so they understand that if they, keep their pencil in their pocket, what might happen in that situation. It could fall out and get in the product, and what does that look like? So things like bandages, hair and hair nets, earrings, watches, jewelry, which is why we have our no jewelry policy. And just to touch on the bandages, we have blue bandages, so you can visibly detect them if they're fall into a box. Typically, we don't usually, in the Jamara application, we don't have metal detectors. So having a metal strip in the Band-Aid it doesn't really help us, but having the color that isn't the box or flesh color helps them be easily identifiable if something does fall into a product. So we follow our proper food safety policies and procedures. We have standard operating procedures. We do employee training, all to support this and to avoid physical contamination. Biological contamination, anything from unwanted organisms or insects that come in contact with the product. We have 5 categories of microorganisms, and this may be a little bit broader scope than what we're needing, but just so you have the understanding that bacteria, we talk a lot about bacteria, and when we do we test the water. We are testing for generic E. coli and total coliform, which are both indicator organisms that can tell us if there's something in the water. Is it potentially a harmful bacteria? And then be able to make corrections based on that information. Also, when we're doing listeria falls into this category, and we'll have more specific trainings in the future about listeria and listeria control, but that is something that also falls into the category of bacteria. Viruses, Hep A norovirus, these are typically bloodborne, and so these are introduced by humans. Yeast and fungus can cause food spoilage. Parasites, not typically an issue in our in fresh produce, although we may see a little wormy here and there in a commodity, and in those situations we hope that they're culled out before they end up in the package. And then a protozoan, which needs a living host to grow and thrive. So this is not something that we are so concerned about, although you can have them in water if you use open source water. That is, this is something that to consider as well. But also we, maintaining a water testing and using safe water when you're irrigating will help to prevent this contamination. So, okay, chemical contamination. I sort of touched on this a little bit before. Chemicals, pesticides, wax, oils, lubricants. So this is something that it's not just about pesticides or what's being applied in the field. We have the opportunity for chemical contamination throughout the process. I would say pretty much all of our commodities are moved at some point by forklift. And if there's, if the forklifts aren't being maintained properly, we could have an oil situation where there's oil being, dripping from or coming in some way out of the forklift and onto the product. You have a chemical contamination in that respect. Not all commodities are washed and waxed, but some are, and so that's a place, a control point where we can make sure that we're being conscientious about what's going on the product, how much, make sure we're working within the manufacturer's recommendation for that product. So we have improper handling and improper storage, over spray, something like that can cause this contamination. So, and these can be, we can avoid this contamination by proper training and handling, following and mixing, handling instructions, and proper training of the chemical use information. So this is something when we're in the packing house, specifically when we're talking to the cleaning and sanitation crew, something that can be done to support this is to do, actually with the chemical, talk about proper use and how to mix and handle that product. You can give that training with the information that's on the label. And this is something that sometimes gets overlooked as an important piece, but I have some people that I've been working within Jamara that had a situation where the employee wasn't properly trained on how to use a product. He got it on his skin and he ended up having to go to the hospital because it turned his skin white. And I'm not sure if it actually took the layer of skin off, but it was with proper training, that could have been avoided. So just keep in mind that chemical handling is a big deal, and it is part of cleaning and sanitation program. So as in the growing, packing, transportation environments, we have three main sources for biological contamination, and we have humans, water, and animals. Again, we're not farming. It's not all robotic. We're not farming in-house in sterile environments. So we have to be aware that when you introduce water, when you introduce humans, which, we all have humans at some point come in contact with the product, and we try really hard to keep animals out of there. These are all vectors essentially for biological contamination. So making sure your water is proper for use, we have good training, everyone's washing their hands, and again, I want you all to feel empowered that you can. I want you to, observe your employees washing their hands and give them the information that they need so they do it right. And when they feel like they're doing it right, then you have increased morale and productivity and all, everything that starts clicking along better. So, and then again, the animals can be a little tricky sometimes. We have wild turkeys on one ranch. I keep referring to that. And in some, down in Florida, there's a turtle that we have to be conscientious of. They're protected. Bakersfield, there's a fox. And so there are things in different regions that are troublesome, but if you know about them, you can assess the risk and deal with them accordingly so they don't present a contamination issue. So one way to avoid contamination and to really reduce the risk is to wash your hands. Wash your hands, wash your hands. This is a big deal. And proper hand washing is also important. And we can talk about proper hand washing if necessary. Ideally, you have the foot pedals below the sink so you don't actually ever have to turn the knobs on with your hands. If that's not possible, then you always want to turn the water on, wash your hands with fragrance-free soap. This is the fragrance-free part. The fragrance can transfer to the product. And there's also the possibility of an allergen. If there's a fragrance that someone's maybe allergic to, it can cause itching and problems there for the employees. So fragrance-free soap. Make sure you wash, good hand scrubbing. Use the paper towel to dry hands, and then use that paper towel to turn the faucet off. So if you use your hands that you just washed to turn the faucet off, then you potentially have recontaminated your hands since you turned them on with dirty hands. So hand washing seems to be like such a simple task, and yet there are so many possibilities for doing it wrong. Who knew, right? So we can talk about that more if necessary. So continuing to reduce risk, washing your hands frequently, keep your work area clean and free of debris. This is for safety reasons as well as to reduce. The safer it is, the less cluttered it is, the less potential there is for dirt, bacteria to hide and get into the machinery and on the product. Definitely no eating, drinking, or tobacco use unless in designated areas. So we want to keep food, drink, and tobacco out of production areas. Anywhere that the product is the product, you want to have a designated area for that. Employees with the flu or other contagious diseases should not work around the product. Depending on their symptoms, they may need to be sent home for the day, or they can work in a manner that, maybe they push a broom for a day, but don't work with the product itself. Certainly, if there are unprotected cuts, sores, boils, or other open wounds, they need to be addressed with first aid. And you know, not be, we want to make sure the product isn't susceptible to what's coming out of that cut or that wound. That's you know, one way to spread disease is through blood or bodily fluids. So at this point, that's the end of this basic information presentation. My information and Walter's information is here, and you all have my info. If you have high-level questions, you want to talk directly to Walter, that's fine. And I'm also happy to filter information or answer your questions. So we have some time if you all would like to, if you have any questions, you want to come off mute and ask to the group, you're welcome to do that. So I'll hang out for a while, and before you all start jumping off the call, I did email, as you know, email this presentation to you, and in hopes that you'll take this information right after we do this train the trainer presentation and go train your people too while it's still fresh in your mind. Part of your food safety program is to do continual training, and which could mean monthly, weekly, daily, depending on how, depending on your employees, your season, all that. But this information you can take now to them and give them the food safety information that you just received. So, okay, I'll be quiet now. If you have any questions, fire away.